Jay Bilas back here on the Rich Eisen Show, otherwise known as an ACC guy, talking to a Big 18 guy here on the program. How are you, Jay?
I am doing great, Rich. I am just much like you, sitting listening to people think that the apocalypse is upon us when all this conference realignment's been going on for 30 years now. And they sound like folks who miss mom and pop shops on the street. And they lament Costco coming in, and then they love Costco when it gets there. So it's kind of a weird time right now.
Well, because to me, this is the true lift the kimono moment. Because the last thing I heard or saw in any of these press releases is how there's going to be some sort of mentoring or tutoring on the, no doubt, what would probably be 8-day, 9-day, potentially 4-game West Coast swing now for Big Ten programs going out there, right? Like that's what's coming. This is This is the professionalizing of sports on the collegiate level.
Well,
would you not agree, Jay?
Yeah, I agree. But this happened 30 years ago, and I believe that NCAA football and NCAA basketball has been essentially the NBA and the NFL for decades now. But now there's no denying it. No reasonable person could say with a straight face that this isn't pro sports, and it has been for a long time. But, the idea that with all this travel the players are going to go through, that it's not the equivalent of the NBA or the NFL is laughably absurd. And it's equally absurd when you hear the recent Pac-12 presidents talk about why they decided to leave for the Big 12 or the Big 10. And they some of them said, well, it's for our players so that they can play on a bigger stage and have more exposure and stuff like that. That's not why they did this. They did this for the money and for the business long-term sustainability of their business prospects, which is fine. I mean, this is like typical American capitalism, and I have no problem with it. I think it's fine. The only thing I have a problem with, all these schools are market competitors against one another in this multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. They're individual market competitors, and then they group together by a conference, and the conferences compete as market competitors. The only time, and I believe this is true, the only time that the member institutions of the NCAA get together and act in concert is when they're trying to limit athletes. That's the only time they agree with each other. The rest of it, they are direct competitors that are out for themselves, which is fine. But the other stuff is a federal antitrust violation. And they're finding that out from the U.S. Supreme Court, and they're going to find out again in this House versus NCAA case, which goes direct to player compensation.
Well, before we get to that, or maybe this is a bridge to that part of this conversation, Jay Bilas, is the reason why the schools and presidents of the schools, of the universities, are acting in concert about not paying the players is an insane cost. Just take a look at what salary caps are in the NBA and the NFL right now, or it's at least not insane cost, but at least it's much more than what a 4-year one would say scholarship is, right? I mean, like if you take a look at what the NIL deals for the top players in both of these sports are right now, and a 4-year full ride scholarship would be what? Maybe if we're being generous, $400,000 over 4 years. And so you take a look at the costs, and that's a no-brainer for schools to not want to do that. The problem is, though, is they're asking the players to act like they're professionals based on schedules and travel and things of that nature. Jay, right?
Yeah, but even if they weren't asking them to do that, it's illegal. I mean, to me, there's a difference between value and cost. So we can argue about what the value of the scholarship is. But when you start thinking about how that cost is allocated, so the athletic department is said to be paying for the scholarship and booking the scholarship as an expense. Well, where does that money go? They pay it to the school. So it's like me saying, for when my kids were in the house, they're older now, but when they were in the house, me saying, well, it cost me a certain amount to feed and clothe them and house them. And I take that from one pocket and put it into the other. I mean, none of that makes any sense. And it would be the equivalent of me saying, somebody saying, hey, you make a lot of money as a broadcaster. No, I really don't. Because, ESPN pays me, but then I got to pay for my house and my cars and my country club and vacations and all that stuff. So at the end of this, I really don't have any money. That's what the schools are saying, is we don't have any money. And it's a lie. They built these gigantic facilities. They have athletic departments that are bigger than the Pentagon. And they like to say, well, our profit isn't as big because of what we did. But the athletic department is booking all these expenses. And the amount of money they pay to the school, they pay them in scholarship. They pay the scholarship money to the school. They pay for building maintenance and food service to the school. And the school charges them an exorbitant price for those things. It's kind of an absurd business model. But so, of course, like to your point, since they haven't had to pay the athletes all these years, they talk about, well, it's going to be expensive. Well, it's going to put it's going to make some efficiencies come into play. They're going to say, do we really need 27 staff members for our basketball team? They'll probably cut that down to 12, and some people are going to lose their jobs. But acquisition of talent on the floor is a hell of a lot more important to them when they're going to have to pay than paying all these people to be administrators and all this other stuff. It's horribly inefficient. But I'm sorry, they're going to have to start paying these guys and sign them to contracts because it's going to be required by law. And their only hope is to go to Congress. So Congress says, all right, we'll give you an antitrust exemption so you can continue with our blessing to violate federal antitrust laws you've been doing for over 100 years now. But it's going to be a lot tougher for them to sit before Congress and beg Congress for that when they're cutting all these individual deals, like the blowing up the Pac-12 and USC and UCLA and the Big Ten. I mean, Rich, I had administrators reaching out over the weekend when this all happened, saying this is crazy. And I'm going, no, it's only crazy when somebody else does it. When you did it, it was fine. Like I played in an ACC that had 8 teams, 8. And I grew up in Los Angeles when it was the Pac-8. And then the Big East expanded and took in all these schools for football. Then the ACC raided it. Maryland went to the Big Ten. Nebraska went to the Big Ten. West Virginia's in the Big 12. I mean, this has been going on since the early 90s when Florida State went into the ACC. And it actually went on before that, but just not as high a level. And it's only crazy when somebody else does it. When we do it, it's good business, and it opened up new markets, and look at the sustainability and all that stuff. Then it makes perfect sense. Somebody else does it, then it's crazy. And I just sort of laugh at that reasoning.
How did this individual or individuals, when you responded via text by saying, holding up a mirror, how did they respond to your text? Was it new phone, who dis, or that ended the conversation, or what did you have? What was the response?
No, I mean, I listen to it because I understand for a lot of folks of our generation, it's different. But I could say the same thing. Like, I can't watch baseball anymore. The Astros are in the American League. Are you kidding me? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I get it. It's different having you. Like, I don't like seeing the Pac-12 go away. But if I really loved tradition so much, I would have been really upset to have Duke no longer in the Southern Conference, where they started. The ACC started in the late 50s, and it stayed 8 teams up until the early 90s. But now these behemoth conferences are coming in, and things are going to change, and they have changed, but they've changed a lot. And every time something changes, doomsday is around the corner. And, people prognosticate doomsday, and this thing just gets bigger and bigger and in a lot of ways better and better. They said for years, can't have a playoff. And when the media companies dangled $1 billion in front of them, all of a sudden they got a 14 playoff. And now that more billions are coming, they're going to have a 12-team playoff. And it's not going to be a problem. Everybody's going to love it. We hated the bowl games going away. They didn't go away. We have more bowl games than ever. There's a lot. I've really hesitated, Rich, over the years to use the term hypocrisy with college sports because I don't like sort of pinning people with that. I've always said there are a lot of contradictions. somehow that seems softer. But now you can't avoid the term hypocrisy with the way, based on what these administrators say and then what they turn around and do. It's horribly hypocritical.
Jay Bilas here on the Rich Eisen Show. So let's talk about the crystal ball aspect of this and where it's all going. You mentioned before how, efficiencies may come into play here and, lowering staff numbers. You said, why does a basketball program need 27 staffers and, maybe slice that in half? What about if efficiencies start getting applied to, if you will, lesser revenue sports and there'll be fewer college sports programs out there? Is that, do you think, coming, Jay?
No, I don't, because what I think a lot of people miss in this is, now, one reason that they have so many sports now is because they have so much money. So my question has always been, what's the right number of sports? I think when I played at Duke had 13 varsity sports. Now they've got like 30, and that's sort of the around the number that most of the big conferences have. 25 to 30. Maybe the SEC has the lowest number. They're in the 18 to 20 range. All these institutions are going to have whatever benefits them, but these lower dollar sports, non-revenue sports, if you will. Some call them Olympic sports. Some call them country club sports. They all have scholarship limits. So baseball team, for example, Division I has 12 and a half scholarships. That means about 20 or more of those players on every roster are paying their own way. So that's a money-making enterprise for these schools, and they retain those students. Athletes wind up staying more so than regular students do. And retention is an issue for every university with their regular student population. So they make money off of sports. They claim that they don't, but they make money off sports. And they're going to have what's in their interest. And recently, Stanford canceled like 4 sports in the last few years, but they canceled like synchronized swimming and archery, stuff like that. I didn't even know they had those things. But they're going to have what's in their interest to have. But the idea that we're just going to be football, basketball, women's basketball, and softball, and all that's going forward is sort of laughably absurd. They're going to keep that stuff. And when I think it was in the last few years, Cal wanted to cancel their baseball program, and the alums spoke up, protested, and came up with the money. And they're going to have what's in their interest to have. So I don't take that as a threat at all. This is all just a lot of that's what I consider to be doomsday prognostications, and they've been saying that for years. They said it with NIL. We're going to have to cancel sports when there was unlimited food. We're going to have to cancel sports. Dogs and cats are going to live together, and none of it happened. It's all just doomsday talk they've been spewing out for the last 100 years.
And then now, I guess that brings us to the NIL and the paying of players, because again, you're right. I said this to start the show. This is the kimono being lifted, the complete professionalism of collegiate athletics, amateurism, however you want to put it. And that appears to be schools and school presidents and television networks. They got the whole realignment thing down pat. They got this thing handled. They know how to strike that deal. Paying the players, I mean, ever since NIL came into being 2 years ago, there still isn't any rules. And whatever's on the books statewide, I mean, you even heard Greg Sankey of the SEC say it in his opening address at the SEC Media Week. State laws are not enforced. They don't know of a single state law that's been enforced. And then the NCAA is telling programs, yeah, your state laws don't even exist as far as we're concerned. My coach, if I boil it down, a couple of hamburgers to some kids, he might miss 4 games. I mean, the whole benefits and paying of players, I don't know how the hell we're ever going to come to an agreement on that. I will now leave you to answer that based on this past weekend's events, Jay.
Well, I hate to boil it down to this, but it's really easy, Rich. Right now, the administrators and coaches are complaining about 2 things. They're complaining about NIL because they don't know what the market is, and they don't know what they can and cannot do. And the truth is they can do just about whatever they want to do, which I think is the way it should be. I think it should be deregulated. And then they're worried about retention, the transfer portal. So they want players to have to declare where they're going and be locked in because it helps their roster. They like to use the red herring of what happened to commitment and loyalty and all that stuff when, hey, man, the transfer portal for schools is wide open.
Yeah.
Schools they're transferring left and right to whatever conference they want, but then they want to turn around out of the other side of their mouths and say, but players shouldn't have to be allowed movement. But here's the easy fix to all this. The NCAA needs to stop with this amateurism nonsense. That's dead anyway. They moved the goalposts, to use a sports metaphor. They moved the goalposts to employment. Now they can't be employees. Drop all that nonsense and just let the schools sign players to contracts. And that way you can sign a player to a 3-year deal. If you want to have a buyout if the player leaves or whatever, goes pro, you can do that. You can have contract conditions. Everybody knows what the market is, and they know how they're competing. It's incredible how contracts work for literally everyone else in America except college athletes. They could do that in a heartbeat, and there'd be some cost certainty and retention in there, and they wouldn't have to worry about this transfer portal, and they wouldn't have to worry about NIL. You sign a player to a contract just like you and I sign a contract with our media companies, and we would negotiate, and they would be able to tell us whether we could do commercials outside of it and what commercials we could do. You pay for that right in the employment contract. Really simple. If you get arrested, they can terminate. Morals clause, they can terminate. There's all kinds of contract conditions. And then there are contract remedies through the court systems. It's really pretty simple.
And what about going to school?
It works for the rest of the American business community. It would work really well for college athletes, but it's just a line that they don't want to cross because they don't feel like it. And in the meantime, they're going to beg Congress for an antitrust exemption. They're continuing to do that. And they're prosecuting, they're having to deal with these court cases. And the latest one is going to be the crusher if they can't be successful in the NCAA. And I think they're going to have a hard time because they're going up against Jeffrey Kessler, the guy that handed them their rear end in the last case before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Just 2 questions to ask you, and then we'll wrap this thing up. You mentioned Jeffrey Kessler. NFL fans know of his name because he was part of the collective bargaining during the lockout. And, man, did the NFL owners not like him at all. And the league didn't want him in the room at all. He is a bulldog, to say the least. Does that mean players are going to unionize? Is that what that means? I mean, because is that the inevitable aspect that college players must join athletes must join a union, and everything has contracts? Softball, lacrosse, hockey, it's all contracted players. Jay?
Yeah, they don't need a union because all these different employees don't necessarily have a union. And a union specifically may be difficult because we're dealing with public and private institutions. So there are some legal hurdles there. Mm-hmm. They could certainly have a trade association, somebody that the NCAA or individual conferences could bargain with so that they have a more collective bargaining type of environment. And that may be helpful overall. But whether the players decide to organize so that they can speak more with one voice in negotiation with management, that's all fine because that's agreed to between players and management that way. If they decide to do that, that's fine. If the NCAA finds that easier, it's all good. Because people sometimes will say, hey, they have salary, you just can't pay a player anything you want. They have salary caps in the NFL or the NBA. Well, that's true. But those are collectively bargained, and the players get around 50% of revenue in each of those things. So when these schools talk about how expensive it's going to be, they want to give 50% of revenue to the players. They'll find out what expensive looks like. That's expensive. Right now, the players are cheap. Even the highest paid players in college, due to NIL and these collectives, are cheap relative to the amount of money that the enterprise makes, and that's why they would say, "Well, we don't need 27 staff members. Let's put the money on the floor, on the field, things like that." And things would be a lot more sane.
Well, and then that's the last part is the going to school part. If we have now reached a part, or we have a long time ago, but now we are just flat out acknowledging that a full ride scholarship is not even remotely commensurate to an athlete's value and or remotely commensurate to the revenue that's being brought in collectively by the athletes performing, then what about going to school? Does that go away too? And we just play for a school?
No.
What do we got?
I mean, this is where the NCAA, this is in the NCAA's wheelhouse, and this is where, regulation is fine. I think as a baseline principle of being a college athlete, it's fine for the NCAA to say a condition upon this money being a part of the enterprise, playing, whatever, is you have to be a full-time student in good standing. That's not that big of a deal. That's really the only thing that is separating the NFL and the NBA and Major League Baseball, whatever, from college sports is the requirement that the players be enrolled in school. And, they've used the term student athlete all these years, and we don't want to get into why that came up, but it's really a phony construct. I mean, all you have to do to be a student is be enrolled. But enrolled and in good standing, and they can have some reasonable regulation around that. That's not that big of a deal. And if they can send their tutors on their 10-game road trips and all that stuff, but there's clearly going to be a lot more on the road. And then each individual school can make a decision: do we want to do this or not? One thing I say to all these administrators that complain when they say this is getting out of hand, this is not what this is supposed to be about. And I said, well, if you want to play in Division II or Division III, it's wide open. Remember years ago, and I love him. He was the best ever. Jim Delaney still is,
sure.
But he's retired now.
Big Ten.
When they talked about paying the players, Jim said, the Big Ten may go Division II if that happens. And I couldn't respect anybody more than him, but I couldn't help but snicker because I knew it was a phony threat. Like, does anybody really think that Ohio State is going to play Amherst at the Shoe on Saturday with no television and free admission? Like, that's not going to happen. None of these schools are leaving this enterprise. They need it too much. And I don't want to say they're addicted to the money because they're not, but they're chasing the money just like any of us would. There's nothing wrong with what the NCAA schools are doing here. I think it's fine. And each school, their alums and their supporters can say whether they like it or not, and they can make their individual decisions on how to handle this. Where it becomes hypocritical is when they say, we are going to act this way in the marketplace, but we are going to restrict only one class of person in their earnings, and that's the player. That's where this becomes, in my judgment, wrong to the point of being immoral.
Jay, you are the man. I knew this is be the chat that I wanted to have, just to give folks an idea of what's happening, what's going on, and where it's headed. I appreciate the 2 cents, Jay. You be well.
Good luck watching the Big 24 this fall. And you don't even know which conference that is.
No, I don't. It could be in the middle of the country or on the, well, I mean, who knows? It's no longer geographic. I was talking about Big Ten always had a school named Northwestern that had nothing to do with the north and west of our country. Now they've got 2 such programs. So it's all good. We've got it working. So.
Always a pleasure, brother. Thanks for having me.
Right back at you. That's Jay Bilas. Hit him straight, Jay, in the meantime. That's Jay Bilas. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.